Hey everyone, what's going on? Welcome to Basement Radio Arcade Podcast, BRAP. Doing an impromptu BRAP rant. Want to talk about this narrative that's going around about video game exclusives or exclusivity in video games. And I got to be honest with you, like it's something that since Microsoft announced more of their first party games going to PlayStation 5 and Nintendo Switch, it's something that's kind of picked up some steam where people are saying, well, hey, more games everywhere, more access to gamers. It's great. It's great. It's going to help the industry. It's healthy for the industry. And it's not just fans that are saying this, actually content creators too. And with me to discuss this is Game Logic. Logic, how are you today, man?
Good, man. Good, man. How are you?
I can't complain, man. It's been a great weekend. Just got back in town. Just got back from a quick getaway yesterday. So hopefully after the BRAP rent, I get to spread some democracy, which is important. I'm just waiting for you to do the same, sir.
No, man, I got a flight plan filed from Riverside, California to Chesapeake, Virginia. So we need to get in there and finish up some more of that air trip.
Yes, look, some of us enjoy playing simulators. Others enjoy playing video games. I completely understand. All right, so yeah, Logic. So last week we got the official announcements from Nintendo, PlayStation. That I should say PlayStation didn't make an official announcement, but Nintendo did. They announced Pentiment and Grounded were coming to the Nintendo Switch, and then we had news from Rare that Sea of Thieves is coming to PlayStation 5, and Hi-Fi Rush was also coming to PlayStation 5. And so, out of what's happened is what's come out of all that news is this idea that somehow exclusives are now bad for the gaming industry, that they hurt consumers, they limit consumer choice, more games everywhere equals more revenue, more money for developers. And yeah, why not? It makes sense. If I can sell more of my software to consumers, I'm going to make more money. It makes perfect sense. But it's a little more nuanced than just selling it to more people, Hamp. And so that's one of the things I want to talk about as well, because I've seen the argument of, well, PlayStation 5, they're going to, hey, this is the future of the industry. They're going to start putting their games on other platforms. They'll do day and date on PC. But this conversation isn't giving the nuance it deserves. And I got to be honest with you, Logic, even hearing the content creators regurgitate some of the stuff that Microsoft has been saying about, hey, more games everywhere. It's better for gaming, better for the industry. It's better for the creators. They're literally regurgitating some of these PR points from Microsoft. And it's almost, it's at least in my opinion, Logic, it very much looks like some of the content creators got their marching orders from Xbox. Like, okay, guys, this is what you guys are going to need to say on Twitter. And they're literally regurgitating the same things that Microsoft is. It's kind of interesting because I really, I don't recall, and I know we talked about this earlier, but outside of the example you gave, I can't think of an instance where I saw consumers taking literally marching orders from a corporation and regurgitating the thing that the corporation is saying to a word. And again, like I said, the content creators are doing this too. So it's kind of interesting that I'm seeing this. It's almost like the PR push from Microsoft is seeping into content creators. They're doing the PR push for Microsoft as well. And then they're also this idea that Microsoft is putting whatever they're going, like Microsoft, I think is, and I heard Colin Moriarty say this, like, and I agree with him, like it's like they are positioning, or their PR is, hey, our problems are the industry's problems. And that's not necessarily the case, because Nintendo and Sony aren't having the same issues that Microsoft's having in the console space, which is one of the reasons why Microsoft pivoted. So Logic, you've seen some of the narrative going around. What are your thoughts, man? Like when you see some of this stuff that exclusives are bad, it consumers hurt consumers. Sometimes consumers hurt consumers. Exclusives hurt consumer choice. What are your thoughts seeing all this going around now?
Well, I want to backtrack on a few statements that you made, and chat. If my mic is too loud, if you guys can let me know, I'd appreciate it. So, one of the things is that, right with the very last thing that you said was the narrative. So, and then earlier you'd said, that it was an argument. So I definitely want to disagree with you on the first and agree with you on the last, right? It's not an argument, right? It's a narrative, and we should start ascribing, a definition to that these days, just to make sure that it's clear to people when we call it a narrative. It is a narrative whenever you proffer a hypothesis, but you deliberately disinclude pertinent information, right? That you verily either know or should know. And so this topic of exclusives and the attempt to make it as if it is some evil, some universal bad, anti-competitive was the label that was being utilized during the time of the hearings for the acquisition, things of that nature. They always selectively choose to leave things out of the argument that they know should be included. And more malicious, I would say, is then when they are asked those questions about, what about this? What about that? And some of the big influencers that you're talking about who have kind of, climb the ladder right to some level of notoriety to where they are seen as authoritative, right? Again, you ask them those questions and they don't answer. And I don't think that it's them not answering because they don't think that they're legitimate questions. I think it's them deliberately choosing not to answer, to sidestep them, because they know it will be an actual argument. It will be an actual Socratic debate, right? It won't just be a bunch of pithy bumper sticker comments made on the platform of gaming politics. So that's one thing. The second thing I think we need to do, and I'll leave this with you as a question, and then we can loop back to it, is in this, I think we need to have a discussion about, in this narrative, where is the chicken before the egg? Meaning, they're having this narrative about exclusives being bad and not being good for consumers. And then there's also this parallel narrative that that the gaming platform owners, right? Because and that's another thing we should isolate to. It's a discussion that they're having about the platform owners, that they need to start publishing and distributing their games on other platforms and their competitors' platforms because there's no more growth available in the console space. And so, depending on which narrative you walk into, one of these things is the one that's selected. Either there's no growth or exclusives are bad. Sometimes one's a derivative, sometimes one's a causality. But I think as we talk through this, we're going to come back around to those things do not, if you make one argument, then you trying to make the other argument starts to not make sense. And then the last thing is the thing that you mentioned about, content creators. I think, part of the problem in this is in the struggle is that it's not just historically who we would have thought about as content creators, right? When we think about like YouTubers, it's really mainstream gaming media. And really, I think in the coming weeks, what I'm going to start shifting to is there's really no longer any separation between them, right? You look at mainstream gaming media podcasts, for instance, and they have onboarded lots of people who have historically come from the content creator space who are interesting and may very well be entertaining, but don't have domain expertise, are not software developers, have never put their hands on keyboard to write code, aren't business managers, don't understand P&L leadership, right? And so they walk into this space to try and have these conversations. They're unqualified. They don't seek out experts. And when they are asked questions by experts, right, they duck them as if somebody's, pulled out a 6-shooter in the OK Corral. So I think in the future here, right, and I think, one of the clips you're going to show today, right, is where you have a mainstream, gaming media journalist, I use the term loosely, podcaster, right, alongside one of these content creators, both of whom are largely considered non-credible, and essentially we've just arrived at a point where, those two occupations, those two, roles have essentially merged and are the same, and there's really no separation between them. And it's representative of how there's been a decline of journalism and journalistic integrity, but there's been a rise in popularity of people who speak from an entire lack of domain expertise.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm seeing is that there tends to be more pundits in the journalism space and gaming now. And I said this to you before we went live today. Mooch kind of pokes fun at me now because for years him and I disagreed on gaming journalism, and now I kind of agree with his perspective now, based on some of the things that I've seen in the clip that I'll show here in a little bit. But it's really a weird place. I was part of I didn't contribute per se to GameSpot, but I was around Greg Kasavin and some of the some of the crew there that were writing at the time. And they didn't have I didn't journalism then 20 something years ago in gaming, to me at least, was different. It was mostly reporting news. It wasn't we didn't see you really didn't see like content creators, or YouTube wasn't a thing back then, but it was basically gaming journalists that were having the conversation, and to me at least it was a different conversation from what I remember. It was about the video games, about the industry. And sure, there was some there were always articles about PlayStation beat Xbox, stuff like that, but it just seems like it's more about like you say, like these bumper sticker comments.
It was more like the conversations we try to have, and less about tabloid journalism and sensationalism. In fact, I would say, and again, I will readily admit that I say this with arrogance, full on egotism, right? I would definitely, without question, say that the conversations that we have on this podcast, right, in a lot of majority, maybe not every single one, but in a lot of majority, are much more suitable replacements and more akin to the type of journalism that we grew up with and that we knew, kind of in the early 2000s, than kind of what we see going around the industry today.
Yeah. Well, I say the early 2000s, like I was saying, we didn't have those like those bumper sticker moments. The conversation was a bit more nuanced. Obviously there was articles of who's going to win the console war. I mean, those were things, but there's literally like no nuance now. And I want to go to like this particular content creator, Paris, who I think someone had somebody on Twitter had pulled some previous tweets of his back in 2021 about exclusivity. But his perspective on exclusivity has been kind of interesting because, again, it lacks a bit of nuance here. And I think it serves to maybe spread a little bit of misinformation too, because there's some pieces here about the gaming industry changing. And I'll get to that in here in a second, but I want to read this tweet here. 2020, 2021, exclusives clearly mattered and very few disagreed. You don't spend $7.5 billion to keep things the same. 2024, we've seen the heads of two major platforms tell us the industry has not grown and the need to reach more players to generate revenue. So that first comment about we've seen two major platforms tell us the industry has not grown, the need to reach more players to generate revenue. So my perspective on that logic is that we have the console space, which is a mature market, right? Matt Piscatella mentioned that. And you have two platform holders that are doing very well, that have a pretty strong foothold in the console market. And not that there's no growth in the console market. Like you said, Logic, it's not zero, but it's a mature market. It's not going to grow the way like cloud gaming might grow, or maybe mobile. But the two companies that have a strong foothold in the console space, they're doing well. Those are Nintendo and PlayStation. Those two brands are doing well. And one of the things that kind of stood out to me when Phil Spencer said, we're not going to out-console Sony, we're not going to out-console Nintendo. What that says to me is that we're not going to be able to compete, gain market share in a market that's mature. We need to go seek out other consumers outside of the console space, because the console space is at a point where we're not going to be able to steal market share away from Nintendo and Sony. Okay. And I think what's happening, Logic, you can tell me if you agree or not, or disagree, or have a different perspective on this, but I think what's happening is people are taking this, like what Paris has said here, again, lacking nuance, is that it's not that the console space is dying or that companies can't be successful. It's that it's very difficult to pry market share away from two companies that are doing very well from a revenue perspective. And we understand there's issues with PlayStation's or Sony's, profit margins. Again, that's a little more nuanced than saying, "Oh, well, AAA games are not sustainable." It's not that per se. There's a lot of other factors contributing to that, but this idea that the two major platforms are telling us the industry has not grown. No, the industry isn't just console gaming. The industry is mobile, cloud, PC, VR, console. That's the gaming industry. And again, this is where when I'm reading this, I'm like, there's a little more nuance. And I just feel like this leads to the wrong conversations happening, Hamp. And this is what frustrates me about content creators who have a lot of influence that aren't having those in-depth, nuanced conversations about the gaming industry, and seemingly are just taking talking points and just running with it without providing any additional information or nuance. And you think we see what happens when these tweets go out. They kind of catch fire and people start retweeting the same things or regurgitating the same talking points because so-and-so on a specific podcast said this. So what are your thoughts about his comment here about 2024 Logic and the heads of two major platforms telling the industry has not grown to reach more and they need to reach more players to generate revenue?
I mean, and by that, I assume he's talking about Xbox and Sony PlayStation.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, two major platforms. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that we should do is we should definitely establish and set the record straight that those two CEOs did not, by any stretch of the imagination, say the exact same thing. Right? There are times in industrial history where you will hear, heads of companies make statements that are very much synonymous. But to suggest that Phil Spencer's statement and Totoki's statement are driven by the same causality and from the same dynamic and from the same perspective about where their companies are in this particular competitive market is really ludicrous, right? To suggest that the company that's in third place and is struggling to even stay in the game and wouldn't, were it not for Game Pass and were it not for a $70 billion acquisition, has the exact same perspective as the company that holds the vast amount of the, revenue market share and install console base, right? That's really kind of a ludicrous statement that I would think would get by maybe kids in middle school, but anybody of any intelligence greater than that, I would think would be able to do a very quick assessment that said that doesn't really hold water. When we come to Totoki's statement, as we've talked about on this show with, some of our Xbox pundits who have come through, who have unfortunately not really been able to formulate a cogent argument. That statement of PlayStation needing to be more aggressive, as we've talked about, like ad nauseum, could mean 99 bajillion different things. The other thing is we've talked about before, right? How those two divisions really occupy very different strategic places in their corporations. And in particular, just to pick at the PlayStation positioning, that positioning is starting to change a little, right? Where the prominence that the PlayStation unit, and really the PlayStation unit division coming to prominence in the Sony corporation, when you look back at Sony's corporate history, was really part of a major groundswell cultural change within Sony. Those before Kaz took over, and before the networking division was combined with the games division, in the wake of the 2011 PlayStation hack, right, that took the PlayStation network down. Historically, those divisions had been really divisive. Everybody had done their own thing. It was why you would see things like the PlayStation 3 launching, but then like having integration problems with Bravia TV sets, which you would hope would kind of not happen, right, within the house of the same brand. They were just entirely different. They didn't communicate. That has changed a lot, right, ever since Kaz took over. You've seen a lot of synergistic products come out. Like, you mentioned, I think on the other rant or the other show, the PlayStation phone and things of that nature. So they operate very differently. And at that time, kind of the old divisions really held a lot of sway. So the television division, things like that. In the last decade or so, that's changed around, and PlayStation has really risen to prominence as being the major, revenue earner and the major division that the company's fate really rests on. In today's world, you are starting to see a little more diversification. You are starting to see a resurgence of some of those other divisions. You are starting to see kind of a leveling of the prominence that those divisions. The television division is back on the rise, having found some footing, and I forget one other division is kind of becoming more assertive. So, it's that nature of that dynamic within that corporation is going to change. But I think in general, the things that they need to do, the things that they're considering. A lot of what's running around today is how, the notion that PlayStation gas games need to go day and date to PC is somehow something new. That's not new. That's been said before. The notion that PlayStation games need to accelerate, console games need to accelerate their timetable to getting onto PC. There's some notion going around that's new. That's not new. So, Jim Ryan suggested that in mid-2022. Herman Holtz in fall of 2022 did an interview where, after kind of a falling out, a lot of fear, again, kind of very similar to kind of what we saw the last couple of weeks, although not quite as acute and not with as much kind of crazy behavior. But PlayStation fans kind of did the same thing back in 2022 when Jim Ryan came out and said, hey, we're going to start putting more of our games on PC. A lot of people, and also, talked about the gas strategy. A lot of people falling out, PlayStation fans falling out and saying, oh my God, they're going to stop making single player content, blah, 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 blah. And Herman Holtz did an interview late 2022, fall 2022, where he kind of settled everyone down and kind of spoke from a creator perspective. But, he said that, you're going to see games accelerate to getting onto PC faster, but that's from the perspective of it. Generally, it's been taking us 2 years to put games on PC. So they're going to get there faster, but they're not going to be going so fast that it's going to endanger our console business or make our console players feel like they're not, prestige players, or they're not getting kind of luxury products. We're not going to do it at the risk of cannibalizing. So again, I just think there's a large part of these narratives that are going around today that are coming from people who haven't paid attention, people who are trying to, change a voice track, people who are trying to invoke a lot of brand alignment, and corporate PR, rather than just, really report the news and report it accurately and with, level-headed analysis.
Yeah. And, the one thing I'll say is the industry changing. That's not something we just found out this week. I mean, the industry's been changing for quite some time. And the change part, and I believe where we're seeing change is we're seeing investments in other areas, like an increased investment in other areas, like outside of traditional console gaming, like Nintendo's dipping their toes in mobile, and they've had for some time actually. But Sony is investing more in PC. But Sony themselves, I mean, them dipping their toes in other revenue models isn't anything particularly new. I think you mentioned Bravia TVs, the PlayStation app on Bravia TVs. They tried that. What was the other thing that they did? Logic. You mentioned the PlayStation phone when they made PlayStation, when Sony was doing phones at the time.
Right.
Yeah, they had the PlayStation Vita, the PlayStation Portal. Those are handheld devices. They had, if you remember, PlayStation TV. Remember that? That was their television subscription service, similar to something like a Hulu. And they have, and I believe I'd have to go back and look, but I believe they may be looking at bringing the PlayStation app back to Bravia TVs. But I'd have to double check that. But even their investment back in I believe it was 2012, or 2013, their investment in cloud with Gaikai. They bought Gaikai, which was the cloud streaming service. So this idea of them trying different things isn't really a new idea. Certainly they're doing more investments in other areas that they've dipped their toes in before. this idea that the industry is changing, or there's no growth. I mean, I mean, in terms of the console space, I mean, one of the things they've done to generate additional new revenue growth is create things like microtransactions and DLC and subscription services. And so those are new ways for them to monetize, squeeze more pennies off the existing consumer base in the console space. But I don't think there's like this. I don't think anything that the Sony's doing or Nintendo's doing is necessarily different from what I've seen the last couple of years from what they've previously done, other than the increase in investments, monetary investment. And I think the one particular brand or company that's doing the biggest shift, and we talk about like changes, it's and that's why I don't like blanketing like the industry changing. To me, it's more like no, like Xbox is changing. They're changing. You know, they're taking their first party exclusives, their first party games, putting on rival platforms. Yeah, and sure, some of that may be happening with PlayStation, like with Helldivers 2 on PC, and this idea of other games, you know, on other platforms, like console exclusives being on PC. But to me, at least, it's really Microsoft that's really changing and doing something completely different than what's been done in the console space and putting games on rival platforms.
And that's just a generational shift in terms of its perception and interpretation that, for whatever reason, the media allowed to happen and eventually went along with. If you go back to like 2010, 2015, I mean, you will hear journalists digging their heels in and resisting that notion of, oh my God, games going to PC is games going to another platform. Historically, in the study of the industry and the way we've spoken about it in the industry, we have never talked about PCs as being being a caveat or off ramp against the notion of an exclusive, right? We used to always talk about consoles isolated, right, when we use the term exclusive. And so Helldivers 2, we would still call a console exclusive because it going to PC wasn't necessarily thought of or looked at as being a rival, right? For some reason in recent history, maybe along the time that Xbox did its day and date thing, people started kind of, sliding that language over to the notion that, a game going to PC meant that it wasn't exclusive. And I don't know why the language changed for that reason, but it is definitely a shift that happened.
That's an interesting point, Logic, because we always assumed even if a game went to PC, but it was still console exclusive, we always thought of it as exclusive because we never really thought as PC as a direct competitor to console per se.
Right.
Yeah. So we always thought that was an exclusive. Yeah. We never changed it to say, oh, that no, it's no longer exclusive, because technically it's still console exclusive to that console. It's not on the competitor's platform or competitor console platforms.
Yep.
Yeah. When did that happen? When did that?
I think it happened about the time of day and date. I think because you had people like our infamous I don't know what I definitely don't want to call him a peer. I definitely don't want to call him a compatriot, but who complained to Phil Spencer about was it Quantic Dream or whatever?
Yeah, it was Quantum Break. Quantum Break to PC day and date, or no, it wasn't even day and date. It was just porting Quantum Break to PC.
Right, and so it made a big issue about that, and I think since around that time frame, again, like I said, with the day and date announcement, the PC suddenly became talked about as if it were like the fourth platform in the console space, which I just think is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that at all. That's why I've always said that even if these games are on PC, they're still console exclusive to this PlayStation console or Nintendo Switch or whatever console it is. So I want to read. When I talked about messaging earlier, about how I'm seeing some of the messaging from content creators, that seems very lock and step with what Microsoft is saying. And I don't disagree with this part here. This is what gaming should be about. It's about having fun with other gamers. I don't disagree with that. Last week at a Dice, we had multiple conversations with devs and executives, different companies about Xbox games going multi-platform. Everyone agreed that the industry is changing. Again, how's the industry changing? No nuance there. Knowing that I spoke to support console war garbage, I mean, that's obvious. The industry is never going to grow if we still continue doing the same exact thing. I mean, that last part there, Logic, the industry is never going to grow if we still continue doing the same exact thing. What are your thoughts about that particular comment there?
Well, let me just talk about first about I've been on record, and I will continue to rail, and even before, right, all of the foolishness out of last December's TGAs, that people who are influencers in the space, who have large followings, who have people who listen to them, the fact that they do not sufficiently promote DICE and they do not sufficiently push it into everyone's windshield, and they do not sufficiently talk about how that is so different. One of the brand defenders that I was, engaged with in an argument was one of the knuckleheads who, posted the DICE Award winners and said, "See, I told you, DICE is biased, and isn't any better than the TGAs." Just the intellectual dishonesty and the lack of intelligence in that statement, when there's a complete failure to understand that those are the designers who are building games. That is the industry. Those are the people who are domain experts in the creative works. This is another person who went on and was trying to shout, in a pairing with their narrative that games are art, and so therefore they should follow the same economic rules that I should say not economic laws, but economic dynamics, as you see in other industries such as music or video, was clearly just
Logic. Look, let me just say something real quick. If you don't understand the difference between music and video games, then I don't know what to tell you. Like, not you, but I've seen this conversation out there. Like, yes, they're forms of art, but again, there's more nuance to that conversation than just assigning that blanking statement. Oh, it's art. It's all the same. Well, it's not all the same, because video games are interactive entertainment. Music is not. So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm replying to Worry, who just made a very interesting comment in the chat. It says, "I was exclusive once, but then realized I was harming women by not allowing this prime hand meat to be available on every woman's grill. When they all play, I win." And what I was going to say is the opposite to his joke, which is, it's kind of funny how, again, this is just kind of an analog to the thing that we're trying to emphasize, right? Which is that exclusives are a feature and are a matter of product differentiation for the consumer electronic product that we call a gaming console. And that differentiation, that uniqueness on the market, drives demand, and helps consumers make choices between, whether they want to purchase A or B. And it's funny, but it's an appropriate analog that when he brings that up, like one of the running, I don't know if it's a joke or whatever, but is this thought that like when people become married, that they become more desirable. Now, I don't know if that's true, but the point is that it's an analog to
I actually think that's true, by the way.
Yes. I mean, there's the whole notion that there's a psychology to it that, proving that you can get married, right, proves that you're, worthwhile material or whatever. But the point is that it's an analog to the notion that by becoming exclusive, right, your demand on the market amongst consumers, right, increases. But anyway, so that's my main problem is this individual talked about this and used this as a political platform to talk about exclusives being less important. But if you go to that individual's profile, and at least as far as I could tell at the time, there was not concurrent, rah-rahing and pom-pomming about all the people who were winners at the DICE Awards. So he was more focused on that and more focused on gaming politics than he was about celebrating the industry, rewarding creators who were out there to be recognized for their actual creative works. But he makes, the statement, everyone agreed that the industry is changing. The industry has been changing for multiple decades, right? And will always change. It's a technology industry.
Well, Logic, that's my point. Like this narrative that somehow the industry just started changing, to your point, it's been changing for years. It's always changing. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's right. And this is again, if you are well read and well versed, right, in these types of problems and engage with them every day, then you should be very familiar with a book called The Innovator's Dilemma, right? And that is one of the things that we face literally every day, every year in the gaming, not in the gaming industry, sorry, in the technology industry, which is if I'm successful where I am, how do I skate ahead of where I am to continue to be successful, right? Because something is always nipping at my heels behind me that I can't see. Something is always a threat, right, to coming in and swooping market share, right, away from me that I haven't seen. What is it that I'm not thinking of? You know, where is there a pivot that I'm not thinking of? We often talk famously about Apple and the iPhone, right? And making the decision to get the iPhone out there when they knew very well that it was going to cannibalize and be a negative knock on their iPod business, which was one of the most successful consumer electronics, right, in the space that had ever been. So this notion of this statement that he says, this isn't anything new. And I would also say, you know, given that dynamic, you know, I'm damn certain that some flipping journalist, right, given the poor quality of people that we have in the gaming journalism space, is not the one who like arrived at that hypothesis, right? So my point is, it's always changing. It's always been challenging. One of the biggest challenges that the gaming industry has recently come through, right, is the fact that Microsoft predominantly pushed forward the notion of stepping up from $50 to $60 games at the beginning of the Xbox 360 generation when it launched the 360 a year ahead of the PlayStation 3. That's really when the last time that kind of the bellwether was reset. And then games maintained that price, right, until this generation for what, like 15 years, right, from 2005 to 2020.
Yeah, it's 15
right?
years. Yeah.
Which is a very long run. If you go back and you do, you know, do kind of regression analysis against the frequency that price changes have occurred across the industry. Normally, I want to say, I can't remember when I did this math, but I want to say that they're more along the lines of like 8 to 12 years, maybe shorter. So it's been a lengthier amount of time than the historical norm that games have retained that price. And one of the dynamics that I talk about here that we see when we talk about kind of the class wars that we see going on in the gaming market amongst consumers, that allowed for a very long period of time when we had people of socioeconomic status, right, come into the market when prices were depressed and they weren't changing, and came into the market at a time when they were able to start participating, right, in the gaming hobby, and then not suffer a price increase, which again had just not been the historical norm. We've seen similar things kind of happen in the GPU market, right, amongst PC gamers, and it's one of the things, you know, Broken Silicon talks about, where, you know, we've essentially eroded and gotten rid of the notion of the budget GPU at the $500 level, you know, and often at sales that were deep cuts, you know, below 500. And part of the problem is that there are PC gamers who were able to, you know, build PCs around a budget GPU, and they've now been priced out of the market and they're angry, right? And I think that's a little bit of the dynamic that we're seeing now as well. So these challenges have been going on for a very long time, right? And this is one of the reasons, as you mentioned earlier, we see the industry doing things in an effort to monetize that they took on, you know, before they got around to the purpose of just, you know, to the point of just raising, right, the price of the entry level price of games by $10, right? They went to microtransactions, they went to DLC, they went to, you know, battle passes and things of that nature in an effort to contend with, you know, the length of time that prices were flattened.
Yeah, no, and Logic, you know, this idea that the industry is never going to grow if we keep doing the same thing. I mean, the industry's not doing the same thing. Like, and by industry, who do you mean? Do you mean like PlayStation? Do you mean Nintendo? Do you mean, you know, who because the industry isn't just those three. It's the publishers, it's the developers, it's the folks in the VR space, it's Meta, it's the folks that are it's Nvidia in the cloud space. I mean, it's just the industry's doing different things right now as we speak.
I mean, it's why we have VR.
Yeah, I mean, do we have this conversation about this is what really I found, well, the one thing I find fascinating. Like, I don't think we do this with other consumer products. You know, do we sit there and look at the TV industry and say, well, you know, Samsung and, you know, they're not really innovating. The TV industry is not innovating. I mean TV. I mean the TV set industry, the panel industry is not innovating. Like, we don't have those conversations? Not that I'm aware of.
Now, well, I will say there's fertile ground there, right, for discussion, right? And this is what we really got into the intense arguments about last night. The difference, I would say, particularly like televisions is like a really good industry. Like part of the problem, and again, televisions are trying to contend with it, right? But part of the problem is that televisions are very much more akin to a commodity type industry than games are, than gaming consoles are. I think they still try and product differentiate, right? And now they've got a little bit more resurgence, right, because of the implementation of smart TVs. There's a little more space, right, for them to try and differentiate on. Like, for instance, like I'm never buying another Samsung smart TV because I can't stand their smart TV implementation. And so somebody tried to have an argument with me yesterday. It's like, but it's the same end. It's just different endpoints for the same services. Like, what can you watch on one smart TV that you can't watch on the other? I'm like, but that's the whole point. You don't just watch a TV anymore, right? You interact with the TV. The TV gathers information from you, right? When you're interacting with it because of the implementation of smart TVs. You now have content and apps that are exclusive to a TV. You now have TV manufacturers building operating systems that are dedicated to run on their TV, right? You have, I think was it LG? You have LG that went and bought Palm OS, right? I think it was LG, and actually implements, right, that Liquid OS or whatever it was. I can't remember what it is on their front end that actually is part of their operating system now. But I will say, in large part for televisions, except when there's a significant technology bump, you can often go for numbers of years in the television space where people don't upgrade TVs, right? They buy a TV and they sit on it until it doesn't work anymore, and then they go buy a new TV. Now, again, a lot of the reinvigoration in the space that you've seen, 4K, HD, QLED, OLED, like all that stuff is around trying to push against that consumer behavior that they had become a commodity. In similar vein, that's one of the reasons why we say, and we keep emphasizing, exclusives make a difference, because games and game consoles are not a commodity. There is product differentiation, and exclusives are one of those points of product differentiation. This was a thing that I went at with this individual and his partner, right, when they were trying to claim, and some of the other influencers, right, that are in this IGN KFGD circle, when they tried to assert that no one should be mad, no one in the Xbox community should have been mad about the notion of losing exclusives. And I tried to quantify this and paint this out, right, in an op-ed on Twitter. Shout out to, I can't remember, is it Perpetuity, Black Immortal 8, I think, who coined that term, that the things that I write on Twitter or gaming Twitter op-eds. So, but the notion is that, like, look, when a person goes to buy a console, they ostensibly, and I'm kind of using very round numbers here, right, to not make it overly complicated, but every time a person goes to buy a console and they decide, right, Nintendo, PlayStation, or Xbox, and this is a consumer who can only afford one, their perspective is that, hey, whatever console I buy, I'm essentially going to have access to a third of the exclusives that come out each year, right? And so when that person goes in the store and they make their choice, at the point where they go, you've told them, if you buy Nintendo, you get Nintendo exclusives. If you buy PlayStation, you get PlayStation exclusives. If you buy Xbox, you get Xbox exclusives. If that person makes that $300, $500 investment, and then 3 years down the road, 4 years down the road, you then say, one of those platform owners then says, hey, you can play our games on our console, but you can also play them on another console. That person's math suddenly out of nowhere becomes, oh, if I had bought this other console, I would have had access to 2/3 of that content. And that changes that person's math. Now, whether or not you agree with whether or not that makes you mad or angry, and definitely there are people whose behaviors, right, were representative of mental health problems and, perhaps some other things being off kilter in their lives. I agree with that. But the point is that you will have consumers who do that math and say, hey, I'm unhappy about the $500 that I spent.
Yeah. Component of the live chat says, I recommend that person to keep saving for a PC and get many more games.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
That's what you said earlier today. It's a great point, Compono. I don't disagree either. Yeah, if you want games everywhere, don't care about exclusivity, save up, go PC. Yeah, but I just feel like this again. This is an instance here where this tweet goes out. And it just lacks it lacks the amount of nuance it deserves. Like and I'm seeing this quite a bit this past week with the industry needs to grow. It's never going to grow if we keep doing the same thing. But really, they're doing the same thing. It ties to Microsoft putting more of their first party content to onto other platforms. And the reason why Microsoft is doing that is because they have, like I said earlier, they just weren't able to scrape away enough market share from their competitors in the console space. Yes, it's a mature market. It's going to be very hard for people to come in and compete in because you have two powerhouses in PlayStation and Nintendo that dominate the market. And I would even argue at different ends of the market. We talked about the market stratification in console gaming with, high. I know people don't like to use the term high-end consoles, but Nintendo is not competing in that high-end console space. They're not. So, I just think that, this is, I just think the information from content creators and frankly, the media logic just needs to get better, man. And I feel like it's just taking a nosedive now.
Well, not only that, and right, and I mean, when I say content creators, influencers with big followings shouldn't be shaming consumers into, telling them they can't feel how they feel.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
What I will say is consumers definitely need to be held accountable for having a choice, right? And so, one person in our chat, Delusions of Grandeur, who's been talking all of the Microsoft and Xbox talking points, right? Is pushing back on Capono saying, hey, just save and get a PC, when I agree, if you are bothered by the notion of exclusives and you don't want to be offended by that in whatever way in which you're offended, then skate to the platform that isn't really impacted by exclusives, right? Notionally, maybe you are because you don't get PlayStation games as quickly as you would like. But if it really bothers you, then go to a space where there is no platform owner, right? And everything follows these rules of egalitarianism that some of these people are professing. But my problem with Delusions of Grandeur pushing back and saying not everyone wants a PC, yeah, I understand that Delusions of Grandeur, but everyone has a choice. And one of my points with this narrative about exclusives are bad is if you don't want to be bothered by exclusives or you don't like exclusives, then you have choices. If you want all of the consoles so that you can have all of the content, you can buy all of them. Right? That may require you saving longer. That might require you making choices. That's not necessarily the choice everyone wants to make. But the market is what the market is, and you have choices as well. If you don't like content being in a walled garden of a console, if that's the way that you think about it, your option is save your money and buy a PC. And you can buy an entry-level PC for twice the amount of a console. You can say, if it takes you 2 months to save for a console, you can save for 4 months and buy a PC. Now, that's not pleasant, and people aren't going to like me saying that, and I'm not saying it to try and insult you. I'm just trying to say that mathematically, quantifiably, you do have options. You have choices of suppliers on the market, which also brings me around to my next point, this notion that exclusives are bad, right? Again, you have choices, and suppliers have choices. If suppliers felt that exclusives were bad, then they would stop doing them. If suppliers felt that there was upside to publishing their games all over the place, they would do that. They don't, and they don't do that for a reason. It's not just because they're dumb and they haven't figured it out. It's because the laws of economics have driven them in that direction.
They haven't figured out the industry's changing yet.
Right. They needed some journalists to tell them that.
Yeah. I mean,
right?
that's the other thing too, like about the industry, like it's never going to grow if we continue to do the same thing. Like the thing is, like, if you look at what growth and how, and I asked that question, I said, does growth mean getting rid of exclusivity? Like, what does that mean? Like, that's like, does it mean like investments in VR, more investments in cloud? Like, what does that mean? Like if we continue, like, just what does growth look like? And so I see the word growth talk like thrown around a lot, but I don't see a lot of people like discussing what that actually means. So,
yeah, and growth can come from diversification, right? If you feel that a market is saturated, you can shift to another market.
Well, and that's what Sony's been doing for quite some time, and what Microsoft's doing it at a much different level because of their own struggles in the console space. Sony's making decisions from a very different position than what Microsoft is in terms of how they choose or where they choose to invest. But go
Right.
ahead.
And each of those competitors is better at a different thing, right? Sony is, probably better as a hardware designer, right? They have more experience in that space. Which brings me around to my other point. Again, this notion that exclusives are bad. And when I see people arguing this point, the problem I have with it, I don't necessarily, I'm not necessarily going to assert that they're wrong or say that, their predictions that, everybody's going to publish everything everywhere and everything's going to become an app, that will never happen. But my point is that the people who are taking this position in very many cases are taking a religious evangelist stance that there's only one right answer. It should only be one way, right? And there is no argument. And the problem I have with that is that if you look around our other electronic spaces, it should be completely acceptable that you will have two vendors who make dedicated software for their dedicated hardware to provide bespoke experiences to the consumers who are telegraphing a demand on the market for that type of product. And that demand exists, as anyone with a 5th grade education should be able to see and acknowledge. It should concurrently, and this is one of my problems, right, with one of my famous cliches, right, that the big problem with gamers is that they refuse to acknowledge that two states of being can coexist, right? It should be completely acceptable for one of those vendors in the same competitive space to do the opposite and to make software and publish them to multiple platforms, particularly when that platform owners, that vendor's core competency, what they are known for, what their business is entirely built on, is software. There should be no problem with that. We do that in the computer space.
Yeah. Right?
We do that in the phone space. We do that in multiple other spaces, right, in consumer electronics.
Yeah.
In the microwave space, right? The truth of the matter is that the internals of your microwave are essentially made by all one company, maybe two. There are one or two like very large ODMs that make the internals of every single microwave. And then the external housings and the brandings that go along with them, right, come off individual lines for individual manufacturers. There's also then a third competitor in this space who makes bespoke experiences. It's like some super expensive microwave. I can't remember what the brand name is. But they manufacture the internals and the exterior housing. Obviously, almost everyone, buys a microwave. Obviously, it is a super mature business. Obviously, there's not such negative growth, right? That one manufacturer, right, has decided that they need to start building microwaves for everyone.
They got to start. The microwave industry needs to. If the microwave industry keeps doing what they've been doing for the. Yeah, if they keep doing what they're doing, we can't expect the microwave industry to grow, man.
Hey, man, look, the microwave industry is changing. No one that I've spoken to who makes microwaves supports any notion of microwave wars.
This is what I'm saying. We never have this conversation with industries that have hit maturation points. Like we just don't. And with gaming, all this. Oh, guys, you know what? The console market's mature. And by the way, people conflate maturity with dying. By the way, they're dying. The console market isn't dying. It's like Matt said. Look, consoles aren't. Matt said this. Consoles aren't going anywhere. It's a mature market in the U.S. Obviously, there are other markets that Sony is trying to get into to grow the console market, and that's China being one of them. But this idea that mature markets are somehow, that a mature market is somehow a bad thing, and that there needs to be growth in that market. I mean, no. What's happened is you have competitors in those marketplaces that are just really good in that market and do very well for themselves. You talked about Coca-Cola earlier. They're in the soda market. There's only a finite amount of consumers that are going to consume Coca-Cola. So what did Coke do? They went out, they invested in other things, water, sports drinks. I'm sure they make other things we're not aware of. Actually, I do know that they actually make software for their soda machines for McDonald's, and they actually sell that. I didn't know that. Do you know that logic?
No, I think you have told me that before.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that either. They actually make software and they sell it to McDonald's and other fast food chains. I didn't know. I had no idea. That's actually a big revenue driver for them. I didn't know. I had no idea until someone told me that worked for Coca-Cola. But we're not out here. It's like, oh, Cokes are, what Coke's doing is the old way.
Well, and somebody used the term, false equivalencies, right, in the chat, and to talk about. I know, you're going back and forth with an individual who thinks that I'm his Moriarty, but I just need to tell him, unfortunately, there's no way in the world that he's my Sherlock Holmes. In some of the bad faith arguments that he made in trying to draw this equivalency to music, let's say that, for instance, right? And the dynamics of the economy are not solely based on the interaction between supplier and consumer in the same manner, right, at the cash register like they are with games, particularly in markets where we've seen extreme consolidation, right? And so when you talk about music, for instance, he used that example of music, tell me what music, I can only play, right, on a CD, on one vendor CD player. I'm like, no, but that, right, but that industry has also circled around the notion of choke point capitalism and locking down content to an exclusive supply chain. So whether or not it's realized, right, and presented at the hardware level, right, it's still the same impact. And we've talked about that before on this show. In the music space, you only have three major record labels, right, who suck up all of the revenue of the industry. And for everyone else, there's peanuts, there's scraps on the floor.
Yeah. Hey, Hamp, I'm sorry to interrupt. I need to step away for just a second, man. I'll be right back.
Yeah, go ahead. And so when you talk about this notion of exclusive content, right, you need to, in my mind, you need to think about it at more of the conceptual level than in the physical model level, right, of a piece of software being installed on a particular device. And when you talk about conceptualizing how the record industry works, it orients around the same notion of exclusives. Artists are tied down as exclusives to a content and supply pipeline that goes through one of those three major record labels. There is no difference, right? You can get, for a given period of time, you can get that artist's music as distributed by that one record label. They're not available, right, to the other record labels. If that record label has some deal with Spotify, then that means that artist is only going to show up on Spotify. It's going to have the same ripple level effects. So even though those industries are much more commodities, right, in the ways that I've been talking about entertainment media, and we're trying to, in my mind, there are some of us who are vested in not seeing games go in that direction. I think there are lots of us who don't want games to become commodities. We don't want games to become undifferentiated. There are negative impacts from this notion of games being able to be played everywhere. And I'll maybe go into some of those technical details later, but I guess I'll read this one super chat while BRAP is away. Chrono Rig with the $5 super chat. Thank you, Chrono Rig. Says the Nintendo president has said they've expanded to amusement parks and movies so they can diversify their properties. And that's a very good point, right? One of the things that I talked about, that I mentioned earlier in the show, is this notion of companies being hungry for growth, and that is a thing that appeals to Wall Street, and not being satisfied with the pace of growth, right, of just constantly foraging for more customers in the gaming space. Doesn't necessarily mean that game publishers, that platform owners, need to publish their games on multiple platforms. It can be manifested via other elements of their strategy. So it doesn't necessarily map to this voice track and this running narrative that, oh my God, Sony has said that they're going to do the exact same thing as Microsoft, therefore Microsoft has it right and everybody's going to follow them, and Xbox is ahead and is making the right choice. Just in the same way that I constantly preach about, as a consumer, you made a choice to buy a $500 product, you don't need constant validation of your choice. By the same token, Xbox and Xbox's fans don't need constant validation of the strategy and the path forward that Xbox has chosen by trying to insinuate and have narratives that everybody else is eventually going to figure out and is going to do the exact same thing that they did. One of the other things I wanted to talk about is, I wanted to go back to kind of this notion of the Xbox strategy and where I feel like a lot of this narrative is coming from. And I was asked over the weekend, to circle back on, well, what did I feel about the Xbox strategy? And what I've constantly said about the Xbox strategy is, despite the problems that they've had on execution, as a technologist and somebody who's always interested in skating towards the future, this is yet again an Xbox strategy that, to me, makes sense, right? And I'm just going to go ahead and just start, reading from a kind of a script or what I already wrote, because I don't think I'm going to necessarily voice it better here now. If anybody wants me to kind of hold up as I go through this, let me know. But my feedback to them was, Xbox needs to get as many of its titles onto other platforms as quickly as it can. There is no recouping investment on AAA titles when the maximum addressable market is 27 million people. And they all have an incentive, those people, or those 27 million people who have bought Xbox Series consoles, they all have an incentive to access any given game via subscription, any Xbox game. All right. Given past performance of Xbox titles that have been released, I expect that there will be rare instances when a PC gamer is incentivized to get off the bench and purchase a day-and-date Xbox release for $70, given their purchasing habits. Yes, Starfield and Forza charted NPD, and those were the first times that they charted at number 1 since 2018, which I think was State of Decay 2 maybe. And it was also the first time they charted at all since Grounded did in October 2022, outside of any Minecraft titles. So this new strategy that they're taking is a good strategy. But at this point, Xbox needs to be willing to pull a Steve Jobs and cannibalize what is left of their hardware business in order to extract itself from a slow wilting and all the dull pain and negative sentiment that comes with it. They just need to rip the Band-Aid off, skate towards a future where there is less resistance, and it will have a better competitive stance built around its core competencies, as I talked about before. Greening its production pipeline to stage a healthier mix of AA projects will help slow the slide, but it won't stop it, given that consumers buy the AAA stuff in droves. So if you ever look at the NPDs and you look at the games that are at the top, they're always the AAA titles, right? And so I
thought AAAs were flopping.
And so I'm almost done here, BRAP. And so having that AA content has only led, so Xbox taking that strategic stance of trying to intermix more AA content in their production pipeline, the only thing that's led to is them stalling its Game Pass subscriber growth for 2 years. So looking at today's NPD numbers to reinforce this, Spider-Man 2 and TLU 2 Remaster outsold games that are cross-platform, like Avatar, Frontiers of Pandora, and NHL 24. Also, 9 of the 10 games that were top 10 on the PlayStation list were in the top 10 NPD overall list. That means 2 things. 1, exclusives matter, and 2, hardware matters, because publishers see that when they put their game on PlayStation, they do well overall. When they put their games on Xbox, not so much. Those outcomes aren't as deterministic, aren't as certain as they are when they put them on PlayStation. And so every time a publisher has to go make the decision, do I put my game on Xbox? They have to ask the question, is the juice worth the squeeze? How many sales do I think I'm going to get out of those 27 million people? Fast course changes are always painful, but in the long run, while the pain is acute, you achieve realignment and start realizing efficiencies faster and wind up healthier both financially and culturally. There will be some attrition of customer and employees, and I wrote parts of this sentiment like 2 years ago, that look, in its effort to get to its hybrid cloud gaming compute platform, Microsoft is going to lose customers, and in my mind, they just should. Like, I hate to say it, but like there's just legacy customers that they just need to abandon. Phil Spencer talked about this. He talked about the fact that, because they come out of this Microsoft culture where the mentality is always that they can't leave customers behind, right? And I appreciate that for Microsoft, and I think for all the rest of their businesses, they have to. But I think this is a space where I feel like they're going to have to get to a point where they need to look at things like Apple does. Apple does things like it says, your hardware that you are on is end of life for operating systems upgrades. You're not getting the next version of Mac OS, right? Because we're not supporting, right, these Intel processors anymore. We've moved on to our ARM processor, and so you guys are being left behind. Congratulations, you can go out and spend $2,500, right, to buy a new MacBook Pro. Right, so my point here is there will be some attrition of customers and employees, but the faster adjustment lets you bring in new people on both sides and establish a new equilibrium that is strategically more beneficial. Xbox wants to find the new customer. It should get on about the business of doing just that. So that's all I had, BRAP.
Yeah, let me grab this. Thank you, Logic. Let me grab this super chat here.
Oh, I grabbed that one for you already. You're talking about Chrono Super Chat?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. All right. Yeah, let me, I'm trying to pull up this slide here. A second here. There's something else I want to talk about. This is more media related. Where is it? Here we go. Hold on. Give me a sec here. By the way, we have like 171 people watching. If you do me a favor, smash that like button. If you haven't done so already, helps out the channel. If you're new, subscribe, hit the bell notification. See you later when we go live. It's just so weird to me, Logic. This notion of exclusives are bad, and that and hinting at this idea that we have to get rid of exclusivity for the industry to grow. That's just weird.
Yeah, I mean, and again, now I think we can get into some of those technical topics, right? That skates by the notion of the customers you're going to lose, right? Because I, knowing that you can get better experiences by making dedicated software for dedicated hardware, right? And I want that, right, in a product. If it stops being provided, I'm not necessarily going to buy the watered down generic solution, right? That's suitable and being engineered for multiple platforms, because I don't necessarily think that that's a suitable replacement.
Yeah, I think, and I think it also, like this idea like of getting rid of exclusivity, I don't think people realize the impact that could have, negative impact that could have on platform owners like Sony and Nintendo.
Right. So, I mean, again, when people bring that up, we skate by the fact that, look, I don't agree with everything that Apple does. But I'm a person who has historically, because I was a cell phone reviewer and a mobile device reviewer, I've historically used, right, all of the different products and all the different operating systems. Because I think you guys have heard me before. I'm just not a person who's going to come in up here and be a pundit about a lot of different devices when I don't personally use them and have that experience. So, I was in love with BlackBerry. I used Windows Phone, and to this day, I continue to use both Apple and Android products. I'm not always on an iPhone, right? Although when I'm not on an iPhone, I keep an iPad. For my lifestyle and my approach to technology, in most cases, I prefer the Android approach because I prefer the flexibility and the utility, right? I prefer the function over form in a lot of cases that Android provides. But I won't say that I don't recognize what iPhone and iOS does for consumers. I won't say that I don't miss it when I'm not on an iPhone, because a lot of times I just want something like just works. I don't want like the problems you're running into with your Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra, right? Some of the problems that I always run into with an Android device, which is that, quite frankly, very often, particularly with Samsung phones, at the 2-year point, they just kind of start giving up the ghost, right, and becoming problematic.
Yeah, I'm thinking about making that switch.
Yeah, and I have to wipe them and reinstall. And there was a time in my life where like that wasn't that big a deal, and that was cool, and that was fun. Right now, I'm at an age and with different responsibilities. I'm like, I don't know that I want to be bothered with that. Right. So, but my point is that different consumers have different demands and different needs, and we have consumers who do want that experience of, they do want a Spider-Man 2. They do want software that is coded against a dedicated hardware target and doesn't invoke the complexities and the inefficiencies that come with trying to code for multiple targets. And yes, just to make sure I'm not a hypocrite, I will often say when I hear developers bring that up, and that's because part of my perspective is having to manage developers, I will often say, look, we've been coding for multiple platforms for 30 years, right? It's not new. Figure it out. Suck it up. However, I will get it, right? And part of the difference is that when we talk about that bespoke experience, it's a matter of whether or not you have a business that's oriented around providing a bespoke experience or a business that's provided around supporting a broad experience because the customer demand signal is there. Not everyone in the gaming space is asking for games to be published across all 3 platforms, right? And a lot of those games, just quite frankly, are going to suck, right? There is a demand signal as we just quantifiably, objectively, and tangibly observe me prove, right, from the NPDs, there is a customer demand signal, consumer demand signal in the market for experiences that are targeted against that single piece of hardware, because you get great experiences out of those, because those developers are able to push the boundaries of that hardware, right? Because they don't have to expend level of effort and they don't have to split their focus across multiple platforms and optimizing for multiple GPUs. Then you look at other experiences like Starfield, I'll just pick at them, right? Where that development team couldn't provide a performant experience against a limited hardware target set, because they really only focused on Radeon GPUs on the PC space, right? As tangibly proven by the development products, right, that dropped after that, and the patches and the updates and the performance deltas that we saw. and the Xbox platform. So here's your own internal development team who couldn't contend with a limited hardware target set that they have. And you have people from that camp saying that the right thing to do is for everyone to start coding for an even wider breadth of hardware targets concurrently in a single production iteration, right? That being at that initial launch. And again, just a lot of things that people are claiming don't make technical sense when you really consider all the details.
Well, it's because they heard the CEO of Sony saying wherever there's compute, oh, that means consoles everywhere. But I'm sorry, hold on. I'm trying to multitask here. But yeah, but people are kind of, they skate by those things. Like, and I mentioned the compute thing where Sony CEO said, oh, gaming can be, on, we see gaming ubiquitous wherever there's compute. And so people are running with the jump to conclusions mad of, oh, that means other consoles. That's not exactly what he meant, because he also stated that the PlayStation would be at the center, the core of what they do, but that it would bring gaming experiences to PC, mobile, and cloud. And that's and the thing that's kind of come out of this entire narrative too, the industry's changing and exclusives are bad, is that now that people are obfuscating what Hiroki Totoki has said and what the Sony CEO Kenichiro Yoshida has said about their strategies, and somehow extrapolating that to meaning that PlayStation first party exclusives are going to eventually be on other platforms, other console platforms. That's not what he said at all. But I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and they're not maintaining the consistency. As I asked COG last week, right? I'm like, look, you heard the CEO say that they need to get better at operational efficiency, better at margins, right? And that's how you get better margins. You do more with less, right? You tighten up the belt. You as I often get told to me from the financial types, you take on a programmatic challenge, as it's often phrased. Right? Programmatic challenge is what they tell you when they take like thousands of hours of your engineering budget and say, let's see how well you can do without this, right? But the guy says that they need to become, and what that is what he's really saying, right? Is he's saying they need to become more lean, right? They need to cut out fringe. They need to cut out, right, this constant as, right? And I go back to people need to watch the DICE Awards. If you watch the DICE Awards, one of the recipients of the Spider-Man awards, I really like how Insomniac did that too. They didn't just have like Brian Intihar come up. It was hands-on keyboard people, right, who do the actual work, coming up to receive the awards, leads of teams, more so on the front lines, right, than in the corner offices. But one of the guys came up and he said, hey, I want to thank, right, the, PlayStation governance people who constantly gave us extensions, right, because we are often late. And if you're not familiar with the regime of corporate governance and a project management framework, what he was speaking to was the fact that they have incremental periodic reviews to look at their status, right? And to basically say, hey, you've got a budget of 5,000 engineering labor hours. You're supposed to have expended 1,000 of those hours now, and you're supposed to be X% complete, right? And they're looking at whether or not you're over or under burn. They're looking at whether or not you're over and under completion percentage. They're looking at whether you're over or under schedule, right? Again, that's a starkly different voice track. And again, I'm hearing that from an engineer, right, on the front lines, not from a corner corporate office. That's a starkly different voice track than the Phil Spencer mea culpa that we heard out of Redfall, saying that, what they learned from it was that they needed to review their corporate governance practices and what was involved in greenlighting a game for release, which to me was kind of an absolutely flabbergasting statement. So my point is that there are different things in different ways, and there are things that Totoki was speaking about the things that they need to do in the future, right? That they need to get more lean, right? We have the better interpretation, better translation of what he was saying about it being specific to Bungie, right? And I go back and what that triggered in me was the way that I would constantly read the Bungie blogs during the Halo 3 development, and what's constantly about like catered, their catered lunches that were being brought in while the development team was crunching. And I remember my own experiences, BRAP, we talked about this earlier this week. I'm like, when I've heard that same thing from my own corporate leadership at various companies, and things fringe and extras and like the bareness, like things go away. Like they come through and they take all the coffee machines, right? They stop providing Keurig cups. I worked a lot in business development where, we're
that's
working.
Very true, by the way.
That is very true.
That is really, those things do happen.
A big thing for us when we were working proposals on business capture was, the proposal team, because we're crunching, right? We're working late hours, was for us to constantly get catered meals, right? And then those went away. Why? Because those things drive budget, because those things can chew up hundreds of thousands of dollars. You give up real estate. You merge offices. A wackadoodle thing that happens right where I live is the electric company here has I can't remember what they call them, but they have high rate days basically. And so the hottest days of the year, they charge increased prices for electricity right from the distribution station. And so one of the things that my corporate leadership did was they decided, hey, on days that we know it's high rate days, we're going to secure all the overhead lights, right? Right, and it keeps down heat in the building, and it helps us stop burning electricity in two ways, both from lights and from the heat that the lights generate. So you ever look and listen, if you work late, if you ever listen in your building, you will hear HVAC shutting down at a certain time during the day.
So that's when you know it's time to go home.
So there are things like that involve operational efficiency. Unfortunately, sometimes it includes things that we're seeing now, like layoffs, like elimination of redundancies. That doesn't necessarily mean this jump to conclusion that, oh my God, they're going to do games day and date on PC, particularly when the only way you get to doing day and date on PC is by increasing your costs, right? Which drives directly against the first thing that he said, was that they need to gain operational efficiencies.
Yeah, it's totally counterintuitive to what he's saying.
Right.
Yeah, because you're right. It's an additional lift. It's more money, time, resources. That's counterintuitive. That's what I tried saying, but what do I know? The other thing too about the industry needing to grow, and a lot of people attributing this lack of growth to the console market's dying. Look at where the market is today. A lot of people are skating by the fact that we're coming off a very high of highs, coming off that COVID boom that took place when everyone was in lockdown and looking for ways to pass time. And one of those ways was playing video games. And so that bubble is essentially bursted now. And what we're seeing is course correction. And that's why we're seeing some of the layoffs that we're seeing in the gaming industry. That's why you're seeing, like, I know that particular comment about at DICE, by that one content creator was, we talked to a lot of people at DICE. One of the things I heard coming out of DICE from people who were speaking to developers about where the state of the industry is that, there's lower growth because of the course correction that's happening right now. Like there's less venture capitalism coming into the industry now. Why? Because that market has come down. That bubble has bursted. And so I don't think that's discussed enough logically. At least I don't see it, or I don't hear many people discussing how we got here. I mean, I was talking to Christopher Dring, who writes for GameIssue.biz, and I presented that scenario. I said, Chris, it sounds like what we're seeing here is course correction from the COVID bubble bursting, and that tremendous amount of growth, that big boom period that the gaming industry's had. And he's like, yeah, I agree. But I don't think that conversation is happening enough. I think people are forgetting that it's not because of exclusives per se that are driving lower revenue than what we've seen in previous years. It's that we're coming off an extreme high of revenues and growth that we just didn't see prior to COVID. Let me grab this super chat here. Oh, Logic, any thoughts on that, by the way? I meant to ask you, any thoughts on the kind of course correction that we're seeing here, the COVID bubble?
No. I think one thing that I was going to mention, it's a slightly different topic, and then I'll let you get to Donnell's super chat. I mean, I get to a certain extent what people are saying, and I guess this thought came up because of what Donnell's saying. I understand what people are saying, and I get and I understand how there are consumers who are disenfranchised, some consumers that are disenfranchised by the notion of a thing being exclusive, right? I I would love to be able to run iOS on hardware other than what Apple provides, because I don't necessarily always think that Apple's hardware is worth it, right? But the other side of me says, okay, yes, but there are other consumers who are sending a very big demand signal to the tune of trillions of dollars to Apple, telling them that they do want the experience and they are willing to pay for it. And so I have the self-awareness to recognize and understand where, I have consumer demands that aren't in line with the market demand signal, and understand what that means for me. And then therefore I can choose to be an adult and make choices, right? Like during a period of time, when I was live streaming, I chose to do all my live streaming stuff on Windows, but then I would do all my video editing stuff right on an Apple platform. And so I get it, right, that there's aspects of it that people don't like, but what I don't get and what I don't understand is like the person you're arguing with, right? Again, this person who, feels that there's some religious crusade, some jihad, right, against people who want exclusives to be everywhere, and that they need to sack the religious city, right, and take all of our exclusive games away. Failing to recognize that there are people in the market sending a very big demand signal to PlayStation, telling them they want those games, right? A demand signal that results in their exclusive games charting higher on NPD than games that are cross-platform. That's the intransigence in the gaming community that I don't understand.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, they missed that key point. Like I saw somebody say that AAA games are flopping or something. Like based on what? Like, did you not look at Circana's January top sale, the top 20 games sold? Like majority of them are AAA games. And to your point, I mean, like we always talk about, like companies don't do things if the juice isn't worth the squeeze. If the juice wasn't worth the squeeze for Sony to do first party console exclusives, they wouldn't do it. Neither would Nintendo.
And again, going back to what I currently said, right, in the ongoing narrative, right, now take all the business stuff that we've talked about, all the quantification, right, all the dollars and cents, all the technical complexity, and explain to me what Sony executive in their right mind would decide that the juice is worth the squeeze for them to make the investment, to build a game, and to port it and put it on Xbox where there are 27 million customers. That would make absolutely zero sense.
Yeah,
but hey, based on what
hardware, by the way, too, which has its own set of problems. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but based on what Totoki said, right, Sony's going to do the same thing and put their games everywhere. I'm like, no, guys, like it makes no rational, logical sense at all.
Well, we're also dealing with people that aren't rational, logical. So, not all people, but some of the people, and that's part of the issue too. They're not able to connect the dots. And I talked about the cannibalization effect. I think I mentioned this on BRAP Wednesday and on Crossfire Thursday. It's not just like people are like, oh, it's great, more games everywhere. But yeah, there's a cannibalization effect to their hardware business that would have a negative impact to their business. They're a hardware manufacturer. In the business of making hardware, selling you hardware. That's what they do. And I think you said this earlier. If they only wanted to sell software, they wouldn't make hardware. Did you say that? Or is it someone else? I thought I saw someone say that on Twitter. I don't know if that was you, Hamp.
I said something, but I'll have to think about what exactly it was I said.
Okay. But yeah, there's that cannibalization impact to their hardware business where, and I said this before, like if people think, oh, well, they're just losing that $500 sale. Like, no, it's more than just $500. They're losing everything that $500 sale gives them in terms of revenue, additional revenue. 100% of first-party games, 30% cut of third-party games sold, and everything else in between. That's all that additional revenue. So people think about whether or not that one game sold, like what if that one game sold on PC is worth that loss of revenue to them. The math needs to add up, meaning that they need to be able to make up the loss of revenue on the hardware side, on the PC side.
And not just the consoles, but the Pulse headsets, the Pulse Elite headsets, they bought Adiz, last year, and so all the custom, headsets that they're making, not just the Pulse, but the other variants as well, the monitors that they're making now, again, all of that needs to make sense that they're going to recoup, right, the loss of sales that they're going to have from those other things. I think maybe the thing you're thinking of that I said is, I think earlier when we were talking today, I said, again, we have this narrative going around that somehow the industry has changed, and therefore, you know, everybody's got to start doing something different. But again, what I go back to is that today, we have a system that allows third-party publishers and anyone who wants to publish their games on any of those 3 console platforms. There's no barrier. There's nothing that prevents them from doing that.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, also publish games on other platforms outside of console, mobile, VR, cloud.
Right. So people keep making this narrative as if like something's changing or something needs to happen. I'm like, nothing needs to change. Nothing needs to happen. People can do that today. 2K could take its games and make it they could make a VR Borderlands. They could make a mobile version of Borderlands. Sony could take its games and put it on Xbox, right? They could put their games onto PC day and date. There's nothing that prevents them from doing that, other than the laws of economics that they have currently done analysis on and have told and have decided that that's not the thing that they want to do, right? 2K, EA, you know, part of the clip that I think that you're about to play, you know, is about games. And, you know, one of the things that I'm going to ask is, you know, how is that any different from Madden or NBA 2K or, you know, or Death Stranding, right? People can make those choices right now, and they have deemed that they're either not, right, because the cons far outweigh the pros. And so we need to stop, I think, having this narrative that like some asteroid has, you know, made close CPA to the Earth, and that there's a risk of an ELE, and oh my God, right, the entire gaming industry needs to change, right? Like that's just not the way the world is right now.
Yeah, it's a great point. Bring up the demand signal, by the way, that they can do these things. They're just not doing it because like we look at like Circana, the MPD numbers, look at what the console space is doing in terms of revenue. And not that and not to, again, I'm just focusing on console. I know mobile's a big revenue generator, you know, but in terms of like AAA games, I mean, there's a demand signal for them, for these companies to make these kinds of products, you know. And as I said earlier, like they could certainly publish those games on mobile, or they could publish games on mobile, VR, and cloud. Those opportunities exist today. All right, let me get the super chat from Donnell Brown real quick. The $5 super chat. Thank you, Donnell. I don't like the Raiders. Donnell says, I ain't gonna lie, I don't believe anything PC dudes say. PC fans are Cowboys fans. Inclusives are bad. We don't need them. Just playing. Thank you for that super chat, Donnell Brown. And yeah, I don't disagree with you on the Cowboys fans thing. All right, I want to play this video here real quick. Give me a second here. Hopefully everyone can hear it in the live chat.
I don't know the situation. MLB The Show.
Yeah, let me rewind
where
it
I
here.
had made a list of all the games, all the thing.
All right, so this is a conversation on Destin's podcast recently. They're talking about exclusive games going to other platforms. So just listen to this here quick. Destin is a reporter, journalist for IGN. We all know who the gentleman on the right is. Tends to get things wrong quite a bit.
Where I had made a list of all the games that are coming to other platforms from PlayStation. And they include games like Death Stranding eventually came to Xbox. MLB The Show is about to come to Xbox Game Pass. We have Sifu, which was originally an exclusive that came to Xbox. We have Stray, that was originally exclusive that eventually came to Xbox. So like, it's not like the inverse isn't true. PlayStation doesn't own those studios per se. I don't know the situation. MLB The Show is like a little bit of an interesting situation, but the point I'm making is those exclusives still come to other platforms where I had made.
All right, Hamp. The inverse isn't true.
And yet it is. It's kind of the same, but different.
Yeah. I mean, like, Destin, what are you saying here, by the way? Like, you rattle off these titles, and then you admit that, oh, well, Sony doesn't own these studios. Well, it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing as Hi-Fi Rush, Sea of Thieves.
I mean, even in the case of Death Stranding, right? Kojima brokered his deal so that he retained publishing rights for that game on PC. or at least was allowed to go off and negotiate publishing rights for that game on PC. PlayStation did not own that. And that's why 505 Games is the publisher for Death Stranding on PC. And so when that game goes to PC, the fact that that game wound up in PC Game Pass had nothing whatsoever to do with how Sony felt about it. Sony had no say in it whatsoever. So the point is that all of those games are from third-party publishers. They are not games published by PlayStation. They are games that PlayStation negotiated a deal for some period of exclusivity. In some cases, that wasn't even really part of the deal. It was just that game was on PlayStation Plus, right, with no other deal associated to it than that. And so that is not the same thing. And MLB, Dustin seems to make a very big deal out of MLB being some strange cat. MLB is not a strange cat. It's very patently obvious and clear to people who study the industry what the arrangement is with MLB. MLB is a property owned by the league. I think they have a consulting firm that runs the operations and IP ownership for them. But that arm are the people who decide where that game goes. There was some period of time where the agreement was that the game would stay exclusive to PlayStation. And then there was a time where the league came in and said, "Nuh-uh, we want that game to go elsewhere because it's our money. And you guys have a choice. You can either publish it to those other platforms, or we can take the deal away and we can go find somebody else." Now, they may have sweetened the pot. There may have been financial incentives. I don't know. Obviously, we see with the FIFA thing, right, there was a choice where, the league thought that they could go find somebody else to make a FIFA game better than EA, which I think was probably a foolish choice, right? But the point is that Sony wasn't the ones who decided to publish MLB on other platforms. The league were the ones who made that decision. And Sony could either had a choice to comply with it, right, or suffer whatever consequences the MLB decided they were going to do. So again, it's totally not the same situation as first-party studio games and the publisher owner, the platform owner, deciding to put those games on other platforms that were, again, ostensibly the value proposition and the ROI proposition that they gave to consumers who made the initial point of purchase of the console and thought that those games would be exclusive to the console. The math and the perspective just isn't the same.
Yeah, I got to be honest with you, Logic. This is coming from a journalist too. You talk about the nosedive game, and I don't look. There's some gaming journalists that I do follow, read their articles that are good. But in this case, like Destin works for IGN, it's like it's a false equivalency. It's not even the same thing. And then you admit, well, yeah, I mean, Sony doesn't own these studios. It's not the same thing for the reason you just mentioned. Not you, but Destin. And the MLB thing gets brought up quite a bit. You're right, Logic. That was Sony's hands forced by Major League Baseball. And they really didn't have a say in that matter. Lose a license, or the game gets published on other platforms. And I don't think Sony actually publishes the games on Xbox. I think it's MLB that does that, right?
Right. MLB is the publisher on Xbox.
Yeah. So. Yeah, it just, yeah, I saw that video and I was just, one of those situations where I'm like, here we are with a gaming journalist with a YouTube pundit, by the way, who we know has a history of getting things wrong and saying things that don't make sense. But here he is, and he's been in the gaming industry as a journalist for 10 plus years. Like, why even have that conversation? Like, you should know better. Or is it just a matter of you're just having this conversation because you want to drive engagement, and maybe you don't believe what you're saying, but you're saying it because you want to drive engagement. And I know there's people who are content creators that do say these things, don't believe it, solely for monetization and driving engagement to their YouTube channels. And I think that's part of the problem with the discourse in gaming. Yes, I understand he's not a journalist, Dr. Killshot. So.
Yeah, and somebody in the chat posted that. So console game will remain the same size or decrease in the future.
He's asking, will console gaming?
No, I think what he's saying is because of the things that we're saying. It's the talking point asserting that the console industry is in decline, and that if they don't change that there is no growth, and that it will decline.
I mean, it only declines if the people in the console space leave the console space and go somewhere else to play video games. I mean, I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, is he saying that? Yeah, go ahead, Logic.
Yeah, I don't think at the end of the day we're saying that there aren't challenges, right? And definitely what should be taken, from what BRAP said about the market being mature. Again, one of the things that we need to recognize, and one of the things that we need to understand, lathers up Wall Street and things like that, is Wall Street's concerned about growth, right? You don't necessarily want to have your money in a place where all of the money has been made, right? Even if it's going to sustain that. They're constantly looking for the new thing. This is why venture capitalists exist, right? Because they're constantly on the hunt for the new thing and the thing that's going to explode. Because what Wall Street is interested in most of the time, for a very large chunk of time, is getting money back as quickly as they can, right? Then there are long-term bets, like your things like Ford and Chevy, Apple, brands that you think are always going to generate revenue at a kind of steady base, but you're not going to see the explosive growth. And so just like we talked about, right, the explosive growth that we saw during the pandemic, right, that's probably not going to be seen again, right? But you're still going to have growth. But when you try and compare them, as I want to say, it saddens me a lot to maybe talk about him. But when we talk about the way people hear sound bites and they say, "Well, see, there's proof," right? But the comparison is year-over-year growth between a pandemic year and now. It should be understood that that's going to show a very small growth or a decline because the spending was so high during the pandemic years, and we're now deflating, right, and returning to a new normal. And so, console growth is going to be challenged, but we also need to understand the different perspectives that the different vendors are going to have. If Sony and Nintendo are doing well, regardless of those challenges, then they're not going to have the same perspective and feel for a need for change as Xbox is. When Xbox is experiencing the extreme challenges that they are to market share, when despite Game Pass, they didn't gain any market share, when despite putting some content in Game Pass, when despite advertising for Starfield, when despite coming up with a 12-month plan, which they didn't deliver on, their Game Pass numbers stalled, right? When they experienced the challenges like I talked about last episode, where when you look at Xbox software revenue, isolated to software, right, over the years since Phil Spencer, right, took over the division, there really hasn't been growth. There's just been recovery from the bathtub that they sunk down into, where their software revenue was almost half of what it had historically been in 2019. When in 2020, when the rest of the industry was making money hand over fist for software, that Xbox still hadn't restored itself back to pre-pandemic revenue levels, right? So that's going to create a different perspective, and this notion that everyone's struggling, as I think somebody said in the chat, that just because Xbox is struggling, that doesn't mean that the entire industry is struggling. And that doesn't necessarily mean that every platform owner is going to arrive at the same decision that Xbox has. Yea, verily, maybe Xbox is arriving at a decision that predates, right, what Nintendo and PlayStation are going to do. But, the mother of all change is necessity. And Xbox is changing because they're being presented with a very, in some cases, maybe perilous, right, situation and optic that they're seeing from the way their revenue is laying out and where they need to skate to. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's where everybody needs to do or where everyone needs to go.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, like I said, the Xbox, Microsoft, Sony, they're operating from different positions right now. in the console space have different challenges. And I said this is why you see Microsoft, Xbox doing the pivot that they're doing right now. They couldn't gain any additional market share. I mean, like you said, they tried to with Game Pass. That hasn't worked. Their console sales are in decline. I mean, there's a reason why they're doing what they're doing today. They're in a vastly different position than Sony and Nintendo are in the console space. You were to say something, Logic, or?
No, I think I was just going to point to the Deloitte article that I think is the one, you've been advertising, back from 2021 where...
their growth and growth projections and console.
Yeah, where Deloitte talks about the games console fitter than ever at 50. There is no midlife slump for the video games console market. Content, experience, and business model innovations are keeping it competitive. And so that's one of the things that I think that's interesting. It's a blessing and a curse, right? The blessing is that right now we have 3 platform vendors that are doing different things. We have Nintendo going for the low end demographic. We have PlayStation going for the high end demographic. We have Xbox going for services, going for cloud, going for multi-platform publishing. And it's really frustrating again to hear these people say, this is bad for the consumer. No, it's not. You're being presented more choices than you have historically been given in the past. Right? There's more options. There's platform owners focusing on specific market segments of stratification.
They didn't game in the 90s.
Right.
There were choices back then, but I don't think they were, it's another conversation. Go ahead.
Yeah. But by the same token, there's a curse to it too, right? And this is one of the things that I spoke about on Twitter, in that one of the bad knock-ons for this is that it's like, quite frankly, in some ways, the console platform vendors aren't manning up. Right? Nintendo made the choice that they did so they didn't have to take Xbox and PlayStation head on. And so they avoided them. They ducked them. Xbox is doing the same thing. With an inability to take on Nintendo and PlayStation head on, they're ducking them. They're trying to change the geometry of the battlefield. Right? They're trying to stay out of punching distance because out of fear of Mike Tyson. And I get it, right? The business perspective of me says, yeah, that's a good choice. Like, why would you stay in and box Mike Tyson toe to toe? That makes no sense. But the bad knock on of that is right. The bad knock on of that is when Xbox and PlayStation were going head to head, right? In console generation 7, they backed PlayStation up into a corner, and PlayStation had to come out swinging. And out of that, we have gotten good things, right? We got the infamous franchise. We got Uncharted. We got the God of War resurgence. We got a lot of the goodness, right, that we saw during the PlayStation 4 generation. And I mean, quite frankly, the knuckleheads who are running around saying, oh, Jim Ryan's scared. No, you guys are about like 10, 15 years too late, right? Kaz was scared. Shuhei was scared in Gen 7, right? When Kaz got handed the reins, it was, oh my God, what have we done, right? We had this air of arrogance, right, coming off the PlayStation 2 generation. We got ahead of ourselves. We told people they could go out and get a second job to get a PlayStation 3. And guess what? What do we say on the show every single week? The market didn't respond. The market didn't buy PlayStation 3s when they were at the price point that they were, because they weren't offering a good enough value proposition. And so because of the fact that Xbox was taking PlayStation on head to head, PlayStation responded in a head-to-head manner, and we all benefited from it because they were competing directly. They're not competing directly now, and that's some of the bad knock-on effects that you're seeing, right? Xbox, quite frankly, right, there's a strong argument that Xbox isn't putting out quality, that they're putting out quantity, that they're doing the things they need to do to feed their subscription service. They got Starfield and Forza Motorsport in the subscription service, but there's a very strong argument that those things aren't great. But it's okay for Microsoft because it feeds the subscription service, which is their ongoing operational cash flow. And there's an argument that that's more important to them, right, than the revenue gain that they get, than from those titles charting on NPD, which is why they haven't had titles chart on NPD, that it's feeding the culture of their management of the production pipeline. And so there are negative, right, aspects of that too, right? So how that's all going to settle out, I don't necessarily know.
Yeah, that's a great point though about the demand signal for the market. And that you're right. Like the market said no, we don't want PlayStation 3 at that point, early in the console generation. Yeah.
So Max asked the question: think that there's any truth to the consumer demographic for consoles is aging out of the market gradually. I mean, so I don't necessarily know if there's truth to that. I think the bulk, I think the bow wave, right, the thick part of the curve of the console market isn't aging out yet. I do think that, though I do think, for a very long time, I don't know the age spread of our audience, but you should recognize, right, you generally, your career trajectory, right, you kind of come out of college, you're broke, right?
Yeah.
By the time you're on the approach path to your 30s, right, ostensibly, most people are kind of at their point where they're starting to make money, start, making adult decisions. You stop dating crazy because crazy can have negative economic impacts on you.
Let's check up in your parking lot.
Yeah. That is actually a true story. Yeah, don't buy a white sports car when you're in your 20s. They're very recognizable. Yeah. So and so as the generation who grew, right? Remember the first gaming consoles appeared at retail in North America in like 1971, 72, I want to say. And so that generation of people who were, around the age of maybe 5 years old, then maybe a little older, is where you have a certain economic bow wave, right? And we talked about this years ago, right? Where, it's you can have a bulk of the market that are younger, but those younger people don't necessarily have the bulk of the disposable income. The bulk of the disposable income is with your consumers who are older. And so that's where you kind of have to follow the chart of where the money goes, and what are the buying habits of that generation. So I don't know that they're aging out necessarily. I will say you probably have a bulk of people, maybe, and this is a discussion point, I don't know this for sure, you might have a bulk of people who are in that age who don't have a lot of tolerance for the shenanigans, right? That the market has tried to go to, that the industry has tried to go to while it kept retail prices flat. Right? And you might have a bulk in that demographic who might say, look, if you want to charge me $80 for a game, $90 for a game, $100 for a game, just go ahead and do that. I'll make my decision. But miss me with all this battle pass, microtransaction, DLC mess. Like I don't have time for that, right? Because it gets complicated. I don't want to be bothered. I just want to go to GameStop, get my game, and go home, right, and be done with it. So there may be some of that effect, and so there may be that where the industry is trying to target, a lot of those things that those things may not have traction with that older generation, maybe.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that's going to be an interesting thing that comes up, I think, in the future, that conversation of our, console gamers aging out. There was something in the Deloitte article, which I think spoke to console gamers, or they believe that younger gamers, and I think they go as low as age 14. I have to pull that their report on gaming, but I thought there was something to that where they talked about they view console gaming as something that's going to be say they don't use the word mainstay, but it's something that's going to be around because they view gamers that are gaming today that are 15 years older as feeding into the console market as they get older. I'm trying to find this right now, Hamp. It's funny, as I was looking for this article, I came across an article by AARP that says with a survey they did, 45% of people 50 and above actually play video games. All right, I can't find this article now.
Yeah, and that's I mean, one of those things.
Did you pull that off that article, the Deloitte article?
Did I pull what off the Deloitte article?
What you just mentioned about Deloitte, when they're talking about growth.
What about what I was saying about demographics?
Yeah.
No, bro, that was all me.
Different revenue streams or something.
No, that was all me. I only read the headline of the Deloitte article.
Okay. That's what I'm trying to find that now. Video gaming deals. That's not it. I'm sorry. Go ahead, man.
Yeah, I don't think I was about to say anything. Maybe I was.
Yeah, I'm trying to find this article here because it was a very interesting article on a thriving industry, more media entertainment companies. Growth of video gaming was already strong, sustained when COVID-19 pandemic with its lockdown. That's not it. Let's see here. I did find the Deloitte, but I don't know if this is the right article. Let's see.
Oh, I think the thing I was going to say was, that factor that you mentioned, right, which is that what you do see is you see a growing percentage of people who play games, above a certain age, and not above a certain, but as you set that, each time you take a cut at that minimum age, like 15, right, the percentage of people who are playing games keeps getting bigger. Because it's more of a naturally ingrained thing. It's not, as we've talked on the show many times before about how, we grew up in years where, talking about you playing video games would get you beat up right in school. And that's not the way it is now. And that's part of where, like, I struggle with this notion that there's no growth, right? When the demographic of people who play games is getting bigger and bigger all the time. Now, as some of the people in the chat are talking about, as Max is talking about, that may or may not, those people may or may not be gaming on console. My kids, game on tablets, and my oldest, games on her phone now, and I've tried to get them interested in console gaming, and there's been brief, interest and traction in it, but like they don't. Every once in a while, they've come down here before and banged on my door about playing on the Nintendo Switch, but it's not like a constant thing. Right? It's not like me when I would come home from school every day and need to put hands on my console.
Yeah. We didn't have any options outside of console, really.
Very true. Very true. And that's the attention based economy, right? The attention based market. That it's not just, and again, I go back to excuse me. I am a proponent of many of the things that Xbox says because they are good for Xbox, right? If there's an attention market and that's where the competition is now, then yeah, every screen can be an Xbox makes sense because you're going to try and maneuver and get in everybody's windshield no matter what screen they turn to. I talk a lot about, when I was in grad school the second time and it was very much part of my life where, I would be looking at my phone and then I would be looking at my laptop and then I would be looking at my tablet, and how my eyes suffered from constantly readjusting like 3 different resolutions. But like in that type of a world, like it makes sense, right? If you can put an Xbox right on every single one of those 3 screens, but you have to think about, the different type of gamers, and you listen to the voice track, and I'm not going to say that social media voice tracks, right, are definitive, but I will say, you listen to the voice track of PlayStation gamers, and what I pick up from it is that people are dedicated to their gaming time on those consoles, right? People come in, they get on those consoles, they focus, right? This is why you have higher completion percentages. This is why you have, in my opinion, it seems like even though Xbox was the first one out of the gate with achievements, I tend to see trophies being a much bigger deal in the PlayStation community than Chivos. I feel like Chivos have become kind of commodities. And then we have the other problem where, when I play an older game, I pop a Chivo, and even though it's like level 2 or level 3, I see this ridiculously low percentage of people who have gotten to that state. So the demographics and the cultural right norms are different, I think, in each community. And again, that may be part of, what drives different strategies by the different companies because they have that telemetry.
Yeah, they have the data. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I can't find that article for some reason. I came across Gen Z teens going all in gaming, but that's not what I was looking for. There's another article about the where they predict console gaming specifically to grow by 2030. There was something in there about console gaming being relevant because there's still younger people that are going to be funneled into console gaming, but I can't find the article. Anyhow.
And T-Rex says both of his kids almost exclusively play on console. Yeah, so I mean that's
my kids dabble. My kids dabble in everything. They dabble in handheld, but they mostly, when they're at home, they're mostly on console for the most part. But they definitely play everything. So, T-Rock, are you hopping on what's it called? Helldivers 2. We got to spread democracy, sir. Just waiting for Logic to download Helldivers 2. By the way, Helldivers 2, I think moved up. Saw a 20% increase in retail sales, physical. It's according to Chris String. He put this out on X today. Let me pull this up real quick because I thought it was kind of interesting. Where's Christopher String's tweet here? I can't find it now. Yep, that's not it.
Yeah, but speaking of which, man, is that what you're playing these days? Helldivers 2? Has Helldivers 2 broken the Baldur's Gate 3 chokehold it had on you?
It actually has. It actually has, believe it or not. Yeah, I can't find this Chris String thing now.
So Priscilla, you're saying, what am I playing on PC or PS5? What is that a specific game that you're talking about, or are you just asking in general?
Priscilla, we're trying to get Hamp to play Helldivers, and he
I don't play Helldivers. To get me on board, Arrowhead will need to sell a Fastlane pass because Hamp doesn't wait in lines.
No, you don't have to wait anymore.
You're gonna. I don't know if I'm ready to believe that, and I think that might be some insider bias.
Hey, Priscilla, are the servers better now? Because they opened up the server capacity to 700,000 now, and Priscilla's on PC, so.
Well, Brap, I'm just accustomed to Microsoft and Azure, and I'm not used to hearing about like server caps. That's a really strange thing. That seems very antiquated. It seems, I'm on FiOS. I know you Comcast guys are accustomed to having like bandwidth caps and things like that. Like I don't really understand that perspective.
All right, here we go. Christopher Dring in the UK physical charts. Helldivers 2 is now up to number 4 with sales up 20% in its third week. That's two consecutive weeks of rises, which is very rare. Mario vs. Donkey Kong down to number 3 with more ordinary 62% sales drop. Skull and Bones down to number 16. With the 68% drop week over week.
Hey, Slow-Mo, I know you think that is going to get me up out of my seat, but it's not.
That doesn't work with him,
being on the show for 27 months now, I have gained a thick skin, and I can't do that. Besides, it's double XP weekend on Call of Duty. I can't give up that time. Look.
Oh, yeah, it is double XP, yeah.
I told you, I don't know. Did I say this on the podcast? I can't remember if I said this well. But look, the one thing I got to do game-wise this weekend is I'm in the middle of a flight from Riverside, California to Chesapeake, Virginia. I got a layover in Arkansas. I'm flying my Daher TBM 930.
Are you really, is that relaxing?
Yeah.
I imagine that's something like, you sit back, you flying like in a Cessna.
Look, you gotta understand. And again, I'm not saying that this is like a thing that, is something for other gamers to follow or makes me a credible gamer or cred or clout. Like, I don't care. Like, I just look, you have to understand, right? From my background, I spent a lot of time driving a lot of weird vehicles, right? And doing a lot of planes, trains, and automobiles. And so, yeah, I'm just a big, vehicle sim, flight sim person. I've got, several flight control systems around here. I got 2 sets of wheels and pedals. That's something I spend a large chunk of my time doing. I do play Microsoft Flight Simulator. I do enjoy it. So, I've not been playing it because I have been chasing zeitgeist and clout and, playing a lot of games that I felt I needed to play. That's, on E2KG, we always talk about this, particularly over the last 4 years, this struggle between playing the things that we feel obligated to play versus the things that, we would naturally tend to play. My natural tendency would be to play a lot of vehicle sims and flight sims and racing sims. Yeah. So that's something I've been wanting to get back to.
Yeah. Slomo says double XP will last until Tuesday.
Well, yeah, but I gotta work. I gotta work, man. I'm trying to get my double XP time over this weekend.
Yeah, no, I hear you, man. I hear you.
I did finish. I max leveled the Basilisk the other day, and the MWC 13C, I think is what the weapon's called, and the Sidewinder. But the Basilisk was just a complete pain in the ass. It's a big 50 cal revolver that hits like a train when it hits you, but it's just not very accurate and it's not very fast. And trying to level it on anything other than like shipment is a complete pain. But I got that knocked out. So I appreciate the double XP weekends because they let me do a lot of cleanup.
Yeah, Slow-Mo, let me know if you're going to hop on Helldivers too, man. I'll hop on. Let me know. I need to hop on Helldivers. I haven't been able to get on like in a week. I just gave up. I just gave up trying to get into games because of the server issues. But now it seems like that's cleared up. So I'm going to hop on shortly after I wrap up the podcast here.
Well, BRAP, once PlayStation starts putting their games, on Xbox and Nintendo and PC day and date, then we won't have server problems like that anymore.
No, the industry's changing. Can't do the same stuff. But anyhow, want to go ahead. Thank you everyone in the live chat for joining us for this very impromptu BRAP rant. Really appreciate it. And to Game Logic, who took time out of his day to join me. Appreciate it, Logic. I know took time away from your double XP weekend, but thank you again, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So, all right, everyone. Logic, I don't know if you want to be found. If you want to let everyone they can find you.
I do, actually. So starting this week, I just finished writing the script for the next episode this weekend. So starting Tuesday nights, I'm going to start going live for Talking About Games, which is a deep dive series where I get into a lot of the details of the finances, the technology, and the business dynamics of the economics of the various topics in the gaming industry. So, different sites do a good job at covering the news. I'm taking those news articles and diving down to the tier 2, tier 3 level of detail and decomposing them and pulling them apart in a lot more detail than I think you'll hear or see from other podcasts and news outlets. So I'm going to start trying to do that on Tuesday nights. I'm going to start doing that on Tuesday nights. I'm going to shoot for the 7:30 p.m. Eastern time frame. I may have to monkey with that time a little bit over the next couple of weeks as I transition to some different assignments at work, but that's the objective. I have finished writing the script for the next episode 7. So that is the plan for Tuesday night, 7:30 on the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube. And then obviously you can find me here Wednesday nights and on the Enough to Keep Going Weekly Games podcast Sunday nights at 8:45 p.m. Eastern.
All right. Sounds good, man. And of course, you can find me and Logic on BRAP every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern time, and Slow-Mo Backslap and B-Money and Gaming Forte. So thank you everyone so much for hanging out with us this afternoon. Appreciate it. Please hit that like button if you haven't done so already. And if you're new, subscribe, hit the bell notification so you're alerted when we go live. Everyone have a great rest of this. Have a great rest of the weekend, and we'll catch you next time. Until then.